Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Breaks. It's good to be with you this week. As you can see, I'm not actually in Hollywood. I'm actually coming to you from New York City this week. So it's good to be outside doing some stuff, maskless. It's fun to be part of it. And Keith, I feel like you're just like the neighbor city away. You could have just
Maybe
taken the
because I
train up
am.
here. Yeah. I feel like we're just
Yeah,
one train ride away from each other. We don't
we're
have
on
to
the
be.
same we're on the same coast. We haven't been on the same coast for like 15 months now, I believe.
Oh yeah, good call. I will be
Yeah.
back in a couple of weeks, so we'll have to figure out if we
Oh.
can't do a live episode with the two of us in the same room at the same time.
Oh. Well, I am fully vaxxed, so I'm open to traveling. So,
All right, we
and
can get
I
you on a
do miss me
train.
some Amtrak. So. And I got to check out that new arrival hall that they just opened at Penn Station. So
Oh yeah, I was wondering if that
yeah,
was open. I have a
it
couple of
is.
little Red Hat coupons I can give you, so you can get Red Hat service.
Oh, nice. I love it.
Well, look at there's some crazy stuff happening. Obviously, as we have been recognizing this entire almost 40 episodes. I believe this is episode 39 right now happening,
Yeah, I know.
and more things changing. I swear, like one of the first episodes we talked about was a merger, and this one here it is again. This is like the beginning of some other kind of big crazy move with AT&T, Discovery, Time Warner. All this stuff is just yet again another big shift taking place.
Yeah, I mean it. I hate to say it, but it's depressing in a lot of ways because you know once something a big merger like this happened, it sort of starts this fever. It got a fever, and the only it's not cowbell, it's more mergers. But you know, it's not surprising in a lot of ways because AT&T from the get-go kind of really didn't nail this. And granted, they did have the year and a half delay from the federal government trying to stop it and the whole trial, which at this point looks like it was a complete farce because AT&T clearly wasn't able to become the dominating force that the government feared it would. Just made a fact that they're kind of pulling out of the game altogether. But it's depressing in the fact that this is just one more employer that's getting swallowed up, and it's just going to be this ginormous company run by some 60-year-old boomer who thinks he's going to change the world, and it's just going to be like one less company, one less opportunity for real creativity and real filmmakers to be discovered because it's just the continuation of the machine. And as they get bigger and bigger, there's not going to be more. I mean, I know that the spin is, oh, we're going to, because we have so many resources, Netflix is spending 15 billion on content. We're going to spend 20. It's like, well, that's great, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good. And
Well,
it's,
that's I,
and,
I feel like this is like Wall Street really taking over Hollywood. Maybe that's why it's
yeah,
appropriate I'm in New York City this week because it really just
yeah,
feels like a big Wall Street move. It's not about the studio system, the content creation world, making pop culture, changing culture through storytelling. The reasons why we all are driven to be part of this industry, it really feels like, oh no, more money would be made if, let's go hedge the system by, shifting it from a technology-based system to some data-based system and blah, 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 blah. And I think
right,
that takeover, if anything, is you're right. Like, not only are we losing one more employer, we're losing that employer concentration also kind of shifts things more to just more tech. And like we pointed out last week, where Disney Studios was referenced as Disney Content Studios. Really, this even makes Warner Brothers Studio into like Warner Brothers Content. Just like, oh yeah, we have to have one of those studio pieces.
yeah. I mean, you could absolutely see. I've heard from rumblings that Viacom CBS is starting to do something similar to what Disney's doing, which sort of like separating off the distribution component from the content component. And this could very much be sort of a step in that direction as well, where you sort of start with content hubs and then you break off the distribution component. There's still a lot of questions in terms of what they're going to do with HBO Max versus Discovery Plus, how that's going to look. Are they going to offer them together as one service? At the upfronts this past weekend, um, soon to be former head of Warner Media, I'd imagine, Jason Kilar, announced that they are releasing a AVOD version of HBO Max for $9.99 a month or something like that. So that may be a short-lived component, and that might go away, and it might be Discovery Plus, because I mean, there's so many shifting things that are going to have to happen here, and you know, it kind of leaves the whole company in limbo, and the whole company's kind of been in limbo, particularly on Warner, on the sort of the studio side, for going on almost 5 years now, like with the constant shifting, you know, bosses. It almost reminds me a little bit of what was happening with Universal in the late 90s, early 2000s, when they were just bouncing from one owner to another, from Seagram's to Vivendi to GE, you know, and now, you know, Comcast. So it's like they were just bouncing around. And it seems like Warner Brothers and Warner Media, former Time Warner, is still going through the same thing. To me, it just feels like they never really recovered from AOL, that disastrous merger that just sort of broke the company. And, you know, Parsons and Bukes spent their entire tenures, respectively, basically rebuilding from that disastrous merger. And it feels like they kind of got their footing a little bit, and then it just sort of fell back down with AT&T, and now it's just like, what's next? I mean,
when do they just give up? Like, when do they really say, like, oh, wait a second here, you know, what was once important to the world, these studios and studio system, the content creators were very, you know, insular, you know, very controlling group of people. They could determine what was on air, where it was going to be distributed, how it was going to be broadcast. And all of that, all the breakthroughs we have now that get content from individual to worldwide broadcast, you know, within an hour within one app on your phone, like with a TikTok on your phone, you almost wonder, like, when does it all just not matter anymore? I mean, referencing it is just like, oh, it's a place, another place where we make content, but it's not what we're about anymore. I feel like that the naming, almost like HBO, what HBO Max, we criticize that a lot. Like, Warner Brothers basically put their material on HBO Max, and now it's going to be put on Discovery Plus. I mean, I feel like it's even going further down the food chain to, like, wow, we're talking about just a cable network's name with a plus sign after it.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, but, you know, a lot of the streamers are basically just like the basic cable revolution in the early, what was that, 90s into the 2000s, and it's just these streamers are basically like the cable companies were. I mean, I think at a certain point, there's going to be a moment when it's just going to be, the whole system's going to be upended and everything's going to fall apart. I mean, I think we're already seeing that. You see moments of people who still work in sort of the studio world starting to panic a little bit. Like, there's a lot of panic happening. They did their Big Screen is Back program this past week at Century City, and it got like no press really, other than in the trades.
I saw nothing. Yeah,
nobody talked about it. They had J.J. Abrams. They rolled out Arnold Schwarzenegger talking about how important movies are, and the Big Screen is back. Woo! I'm like, okay, but did anybody talk about it? No. And, you know, we're still fighting over when you can wear a mask and when you can't wear a mask. And there's a lot of things that still have to shift here. And I just think that at a certain point, there has to be a radical reinvention. And until that happens, they're just going to be sort of grasping onto the past. And, you know, everyone's like, streaming's the future. Streaming's the future. Let's go with streaming. And that has yet to be seen. I mean, it's tough to say, like, whether or not the younger generation and the millennials and Gen Y, iGen, as they're also known, are going to, you know, want to go back to the theaters, or whether or not they're just going to be happy sitting at home and then not really care. And then there's the problem that there's just so much out there that you can't watch all of it. There's just no way you can watch all the content that's currently out there right now. That it's just, at a certain point, there's going to have to either be like a pullback in terms of how much is being produced, or it just has to be a complete reinvention of how we digest content and what it looks like, and, you know, how we go from there.
You know, where it hit home for me this week was, I was on the phone with one of my clients, and, you know, summarize it very simply, they were asked to make a series of TikTok videos. But there was a very confusing part of the conversation of what's the budget going to be? Because in practical reality, most TikTok videos don't cost anything. They don't cost TikTok anything. You know, obviously brands, in this case, brand trying to do something on TikTok platform. But the thought of, like, wow, it's just 10 seconds. It's really an iPhone. And by the way, the entire production pipeline is all done within one app. You don't even need to move data from system to system to system to system. Mm-hmm. So really, what does a production company do? Right. Isn't it just a teenager taking an eye and then changing? Because that's all they want. They just want TikTok. They want to, so there was a strategy needed or a creative approach needed to what's the story we're going to tell, regardless of technology distribution or what have you. The creative still has to come out, and that's what they're being hired for. But there's this weird moment of like, oh yeah, the production system, the studio system, even the basic production methodology and technology that we used, all of that really kind of disappears from one generation to the other, or one content creator to the other.
I mean, it's fascinating. You make a great point, because they're just trying to capture the magic of a TikTok video. And a TikTok video is magical because it's just somebody in their house just making it, and it just boom. Whereas all these brands are like, oh, we need TikTok because that's where our customers are. But they can smell that from a mile away. They can smell advertising. They can smell any of that from a mile away. What they should be trying to do is engage with actual people and influencers and create sort of brand ambassadors to get excited about their brand and sort of do it more organically that way, versus just calling a production company and say, hey, we need TikTok videos. The other thing that I find fascinating...
But if you're an agency, that's what you do. If you're an agency, you've written the script, somebody has to make it. And you're right. No one wants to repeat the Pepsi Jenner flaw of like, oh, she's an influencer, so let's fake influence on a fake...
Yeah, let's put her on a commercial drinking Pepsi because that'll drive everyone to buy Pepsi.
Yeah, because it's so transparent and natural or whatever. Yeah.
Well, it's hilarious because just talking sort of about how sometimes there's a lot of panicking happening. I saw a spot on a show I was watching to go watch a trailer. And I was like, is this really what they're doing now? They're spending money on a spot. Go watch the trailer now. And I'm like, really? That's what you're going to spend your media budget on? Like, here, the trailer's out. Go watch it. And I'm like, oh.
Well, because the trailer's 3 minutes. And so that's a long attention span nowadays. So we have to advertise.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, go watch our trailer. I mean, first it was like the 5-second bumper, which has become a thing, where you like basically do a quick, because of the YouTube, you do a quick sizzle of the of the trailer, so people will hang around for the whole trailer, versus just clicking out before the 5-second time expires on a YouTube ad, basically. And now they're actually advertising on TV. The trailer's out now. Go watch it. And I'm like, really?
Keith, one of my clients
this is not an evolution. This is like going backwards. Hey, go watch our advertisement after you watch this advertisement. I mean,
no, Keith, I have a client making a teaser for their teaser.
Oh yeah, that's like
and you're like, what did you? But it's no. We have this influencer that tells people to go watch the teaser, then watches the trailer, and then you watch the content. You're like, what is the game we're playing? Yeah, so that whole, I think the mechanisms that are in place, we're all trying to reinvent, try to understand them and how they fall in place. So some of this, I think, this thing with AT&T, Discovery, Warner, all that stuff, it's asking some of those same questions. It really is like, where's the value nowadays? How do people understand what is valuable? How to make it real? Who's going to watch it? Who gets paid along the way? You can imagine AT&T is a media company. They're going to be paid by data. Or is anything they're doing helping generate data?
Yeah, I mean I mean that's a big part of it, and I think AT&T kind of came into it with this thought of like, we have all these people who have phones, and we have DirecTV, and we have the communications down to a science. This is going to be like the perfect merger. And then it ended up like really not being that. I mean, I think it's the oversimplification of what it takes to make something that's memorable to people. And, when John Stankey got up and presented HBO Max, he was made fun of because it was basically like an NBA presentation. I mean, this was basically HBO Max, the launch, and everything was put together more or less by NBA guys and gals.
That's right. Yeah.
They looked at decks and they're like, see, this is the quadrant and the, functionality and marketing and ROI. Blah, blah, blah. like, okay, yeah, maybe Wall Street cares about that, but you know, the people on the ground actually making the content, they're not going to be able to splice heads or tails of that. And you know, he tried to overwhelm the industry with sort of all the data that we have at our fingertips, and that's what's going to really make this work. And it ended up being sort of like a butting of heads, and he lost a lot of talented creatives because they're like, oh, screw this, I'm not doing this, is not how I operate.
Right.
Now, I think there was a lot of belt tightening that was necessary because Warner Brothers has been known to spend like drunken sailors. And I think some of that, you know, more rigorous budgeting, I think is going to help them in the long run. But I think, you know, the company itself is just a battered entity right now. And who knows when Discovery comes on and the CEO of Discovery takes over and the new company, and what's that going to look like? And everyone's going to be like, well, who's going to be my boss? I don't know who my boss is anymore. I just went through a reorg. Now I got to go through another reorg.
Yeah, the burnout, let's say the career trajectory for the people, the burnout is real. And they're not the only one, right? I mean, the MGM Amazon conversation that seems to be picking up, being more realistic, like that's another replacement. They're going to find the efficiencies, cut things back. And again, I feel like that just takes MGM, really moves them to the content creation space. And we have the platform, Amazon or Prime, specifically Prime, trying to find more for their library. And just grow.
I mean, it's a matter of, you know, they want the library. That's what Amazon wants. I mean, listen, I mean, if I worked at MGM right now, I'd be getting my resume in shape because I don't know how many of those people are going to survive when Amazon swallows them up, because Amazon's got an entire studio infrastructure that they spent years building, and I don't think they're going to chuck it because, you know, you've got a bunch of people from MGM coming over.
Right.
So again, that's another employer swallowed up by this giant, you know, this merger mania. And these tech overlords coming in and just saying, okay, this is how we're going to reinvent the wheel. We're just going to buy you and just throw you up on our platform, fingers crossed. So, you know, it's interesting to see. I think there's definitely some opportunities that are going to come of all this. As I've said, and it's sort of the theme of our podcast, I'm a lot of ways happy about all of this because the studio system has been ungodly frustrating for anyone who starts sort of, you know, the bottom and works their way up, because it's slow to change. The same people have been in charge for 30 years. And, you know, now is the time for some reinvent the wheel. But unfortunately, with all these mergers, you still kind of have the same people at the top. So until that really starts to change, you're not going to see a lot of, you know, major changes in direction or how content's produced. But hopefully there'll be some more smaller upstart companies that start popping up, because there will be opportunities. And with a lot of these people out of work, they're going to be looking like, oh, well, hey, you know what? I'm going to start my own thing.
Yeah. And that's the question I want to ask, right? So you have, you know, the Discovery Plus deal happening. We have the Amazon MGM deal happening. As you and I speculate, we have the Apple Sony deal not yet being talked about, but we promise we don't know anything. We're just can read some tea leaves of there's a reality of what Apple needs to do and what Sony needs to do that has to be playing itself out there. So I want to ask the question, like, what then is going to be the new reality? Because my hope is that people are listening to the podcast also know for certain we need them. You know, they're going to be creative. They're going to be understood. They're going to know things and evolve technology in a certain way. They're going to take that technology and do unique, creative look and feel and aspects to it that nobody else can do without that kind of creative fingerprint that each person has. So it's not, you know, sure, the studio structure, the white collar part of the situation is all changing. The marketing aspects and strategy is changing, but we still need those creators. And we still want the unique individual telling that unique story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where, you know, it's all going to shift, and we'll see where it lands. Like, we don't know if, you know, a lot of the theaters are going to survive. I think in the next couple of weeks with Quiet Place 2 and Fast and Furious 9, I think we'll really start to see the appetite for people to go back to the theaters. But even if they do have a relatively robust opening weekend, that's still not going to solve the underlying issue, which is that there are a lot of people who don't really want to go back to the way things were. And there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be looking for new ways to do things. And will a Disney or an NBC Universal swoop in and buy a theater chain and, turn it into a different experience? And will that draw more people back? I mean, it's just, there's a lot of things that are happening right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that all sort of settles out, and who knows what the next merger will be.
Yeah,
Comcast is sniffing around. Comcast apparently was sniffing around on Time Warner Media, but AT&T passed. So, I mean, I'm sure Brian Roberts is still sort of taking a look at the landscape and figuring out what his next move is, because this is what happens. It starts, I said last week, Rupert Murdoch took a look at the landscape and said, I can't compete with Apple, Netflix, and Amazon unless I get bigger. So he calls Jeff Bewkes. Can we merge? Jeff Bewkes says no. And he's like, fine. Bob Iger. Can we merge? Bob Iger's like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah. And then and then it just sort of starts it. And now all of a sudden, like, okay, we got to get bigger if we're going to compete. We have to get bigger. And unfortunately, that's just sort of the nuts and bolts reaction to how this system works. It would be nice to see someone sort of refocus and be like, let's reinvent the wheel. Let's start something new. Let's try this. Let's try that. Because this is the opportunity to try those things. And you don't have to spend a ton of money to try it. Just give it a whirl. But, I just think there's just so little appetite to try things and fail that I think the immediate gut reaction is like, okay, let's just try to get bigger. Let's go swallow up another company so we can have their library. Because it's not necessarily about the people per se. It's about the library. Like, I want that library. Like, you take, like, Sony, for example. Comcast really doesn't have a reason for Sony because they already have a movie studio, but Sony has Marvel. They have Marvel titles. More importantly, they have Spider-Man. So, like, Universal could be like, we could get in that game, or like, that kind of thing. But who knows? I mean, I wish it was more about the people, because so many people wouldn't lose their jobs.
It will be. It will be about the people eventually, right? So that idea that the middle class is shifting, and there is going to be, we'll say, the content creators. The people that are just basically willing to take a camera, shoot anything, post on it on social media, and keep that distraction media happening. That is part of the consumer economy we live in right now. And then you have the Wall Street, controllers that are asking for a certain kind of data. So I'd say, like, there's that opportunity for the new middle class of the specific storytellers, the creators in a certain way that are somewhat agnostic, studio agnostic, platform agnostic. Even genre agnostic, maybe, because that's a lot of that social media opportunity allows you to be genre agnostic. You can just turn a camera and do something different. But I look at the Predator poster behind you and I say, but there are still moments like that we want to consume as buyers. Yeah. And it can't all just be in the Marvel universe. So someone has to be creating new characters, new opportunity that's there. So yeah, I can begin to see what the new reality looks like. And can almost touch, what some of the strategy needs to be in place. I know with your clients, they're asking you these same questions, specifically like, how do I take this project in marketing? How do I differentiate myself from others in the marketing place and employ these new tools? Because with your strategy that you give your clients, you're employing all these new tools to be part of the storyline. You're telling the story sooner than waiting for the whole thing to be shot and cut like you did back in the Fox days. So there are exciting aspects to what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of what's exciting about what some of the clients that I deal with. They're very much open to trying new things, and they want to, and they know they have to adapt. I mean, that's the thing that's sort of exciting about this newer generation that's sort of rising up in sort of the content creation spaces. They recognize that the old ways are dead and are not working. I don't want to say dead, but they have to adapt and they have to try something new, and they have to be open to that. And that's kind of exciting for me as sort of their, consultant, helping them guide through that, because I've wanted to try different things and I was always kind of rebuffed, because it was like, no, this is how we do it. We have to do the $30 million media spend or whatever it happens to be. We have to do our TV campaign. And I was always like the one, like, why don't we have anyone on set now? We're shooting the movie. Give the actors phones. Like, let's try something new. Give them cameras. Let them shoot it. So what if they see behind the scenes? Everyone loves to peek behind the curtain. it's not. We don't have to be so sacred with it.
Yeah.
Bring the audience in. You bring them in. You make them your sort of like champions, and then you just kind of let the thing work itself that way, versus just being so protective of it and like running a spot saying, "Go watch our trailer now," which to me is just
or so prescribed. Like, we already bought all this media time from the network. We have to fill it with something, so we have to make teasers to fulfill the POs that we put out there for a year and a half ago. So you're stuck really perpetuating an old system. And you're right. You're breaking through. You're saying, hey, you don't have the obligations as a large studio that already prescribed all of the marketing material before the film was even started. But you can start something new.
That goes to all the people kind of who, there are a lot of people who are at the top who that's just what they know, and that's what they've done, and that's what they trust. And their bosses, that's what they know, and that's what they trust. So that's what they just keep doing. So again, like in 2 weeks, we'll see if like the old ways of like sending John Krasinski on a road tour, going to pop into theaters to say, hey, thanks for coming out, whether or not all those old tricks, whether or not they still work. And maybe they do. I mean, I don't necessarily think they do, but maybe people are so desperate to get back into a theater that stuff still works. But I'm not necessarily sold on that, especially given what we talked about last week about sort of the death of celebrity. Like, that's not going to convince me to go to a movie because John Krasinski might show up at my theater.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So much to cover. You know what I love about this conversation? It just reminds me of where this whole podcast started. We'd jump on a phone call, recognize something's happened, and we'd share the experience our clients were having and say, I was calling you for strategy. We were talking. You were calling me for strategy. Not usually. I was usually calling you for strategy.
Give yourself a little credit. You need a
sounding board for your strategy.
There you go. That's better.
But really, opportunity to process it and just get it out loud. Like, we want people to know that you're not the only one wondering, not the only one thinking. We care about you. There's some amazing stuff happening, but Hollywood is breaking. And that's the break. So, hey, it's episode 39. It's great to be getting the next episode.
Chugging along. I love it.
And we have a guest coming up next week, right?
Yes. I should say, because I did promote this guest last week. So we are having the head of SVP of research at Lionsgate, Tim Heindel, buddy of mine from Fox, who's supposed to join us this week. Unfortunately, he got meeting bombed yesterday. So as anyone who works in the industry knows how that goes. So we had to reschedule, so he will be joining us on the 4th. But next week, we have brand content guru Michelle Marks joining us, and that should be a very exciting conversation because she is a very forward-thinking executive in terms of how you engage with your audience. So that should be a very eye-opening and great conversation.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to Michelle. It's going to be really great. Well, thank you, my friend. It's great to be with you today. Again, Lydia, we couldn't do this without you. We know there's a whole team of people that you're close to in Moldova making this happen, especially the Ghost Social team. Thank you to all of you that helped put this out there. Connor, thanks for the research, keeping us on track, giving us information we need to. And we just want to thank you also, the audience, for being part of this. If you love what you hear, please subscribe, whatever platform you're on. You can always find us on social media. There's constant conversations going on there. We'd love to hear more about you. And until next week, really, we'll see you on Hollywood Breaks. Good to see you, Keith.
See you next week.